5:30, could be 6:30 Central Time.
Streets are saying 6:30.
I have no clue what time it is on the East or West Coast. Too much math involved.
Irrelevant.
Glenn,
Here and now.
our fearless leader, Peter, is out all week, so the Youngs are running the show, which has probably our compliance officer a little worried this morning. We're going to get into what was a pretty normal open for traditional currencies. Cryptocurrencies, not good.
No papa.
But starting to shape up to an interesting day for sure. Some U.S. dollar selling across the board, but a real mixed bag. We'll get into that in a second. What happened this weekend?
Oh, great weekend.
It was a classic Chicago weekend. First time the temperatures get above like 40, 50 degrees, you had to go wild.
Yeah, I mean, I probably don't even have to say it. You can tell I spent all of yesterday tanning.
Next.
I have a patio, and we made our indoor couch and outdoor couch for the weekend, so that was good. But we remembered to bring it in last night.
King of the Hill style, you just put it by the trash cans.
Exactly, it was awesome.
Nice.
And then, Saturday night I broke out my signature move on the dance floor.
Hell yeah. Okay, do the people, have we talked about this before?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so it's like 12, 1 o'clock.
This one was early. It was probably 11.
You're at a real... Okay, so bad. The scene is turning very bad early.
No, we walked into an establishment in River North.
All right.
The floor has disco lights. Celeste, 3rd floor.
Okay.
We walk in there, rolling deep.
What, like 20 dudes?
No, like 12.
12 guys.
And my roommate's parents. So it was good. It was a good mix.
At Celeste.
Yes.
Okay.
And I know what that place is capable of. It wasn't there yet.
Gotcha.
But we had some active participants.
It was early.
Yeah. It was a little crowded. People wanted to dance. We could tell. The DJ was actually playing good music.
And people weren't dancing.
You could tell they were trying to break out of their shell, but everyone thought it was too early.
Yeah.
So we just had to blow the doors
blasted
off.
enough.
Exactly. So we broke out. Belt comes off.
Belt comes off of you. Take your belt off.
Wasn't me. Roommate volunteered belt this time.
Roommate whose parents are in town.
Correct. And
he's like,
me.
Dad, you thought you were the only one who could take your belt off. Okay.
It's time. Oh, how the turntables.
All right.
Belt, you, me, hold.
You and him are holding his belt.
Yep.
Okay.
And then belt limbo commences. It writes itself. It's magical. And you always say this, and I absolutely hear you, that you tell me in my mind one thing might be happening, and in everyone else's mind it looks very different, and we might be rude in a public setting. People aren't appreciating it.
It's like the first season of Eastbound and Down, where like the lead character, I forget, Kenny Powers, he has taken a bunch of drugs and gone to the like the school dance where there are like little kids and whatever. And he's like, in his mind, he's like dancing. It's looking great. But then finally, like the camera like turns from being like this, kind of like coked out, whatever, like, oh, he's like looking really good, to like what's actually happening.
Right.
And he just looks like a big fat slob, and then he pukes.
No, it didn't look like that.
And so I just wonder if you and your boys, one of you pulls your belt off, which is a weird move to start. If I'm at a bar and someone around me pulls their belt off, and then one of their other buddies is like doing a little dance with his belt, I'm probably turning to my group of friends and saying, we need to get out of here before I've seen Eyes Wide Shut, and I don't want to be a part of that.
Okay, yes, I hear you.
But people like it.
We got, I kid you not, 20 to 25 people involved doing the limbo.
Good.
Like, cleared out the space.
You're 12 of them. So.
No. 20 to 25 other people.
Okay.
And the setup is kind of, you go through anyway. And so we had a good...
So people are like entering...
Yeah, they're kind of finding a way. They're trying to end.
Okay.
And so it worked out. Even one of the servers got involved. He had a whistle, and he was carrying drinks, and he went... It was pretty impressive.
Wow.
So yeah, usually the staff there don't appreciate you taking your belt off and doing this this time.
Usually a no-no, but okay, that's pretty good. Good for you, man, providing some content.
You got to do it.
I think you must have heard that last week. I think Pete said that Bridget came on the show and said that she's given up boys for Lent, and that is the funniest thing I've ever heard.
40 days. God gave me the strength.
Oh my gosh, but that's pretty good. Taking your belt off with your roommate's parents and playing a game of limbo at Celeste. I have for you, I could tell one quick story. I have Frank and Callie go to a hot yoga class. I have normal brunch with normal friends. I have sushi taku all you can eat dinner with Callie's new friend in from Florida, which was a minefield.
I was gonna say, what did you get in more trouble?
I went
hot yoga or all you can eat
that dinner. I went from like, I don't want to go talk to your goofy friend. She's like, well, I'll pay for the sushi taku. I'm in. And then it's like, I'm like falling asleep and I'm like trying to stay engaged. And then after the dinner, she's like, well, you really liked what's her name? And I'm like, am I supposed to listen to these people or not? And then went and saw Aziz Ansari.
How was that?
Yesterday. It was good. There's something weird about comedy shows where, like, have you noticed that everybody at a comedy show is from the suburbs? Which isn't like I love the suburbs, whatever, the whole thing. I'm just noting that I'm at the Chicago Theater and I'm looking around and everybody there is like very obviously not from the city. Not in a mean way, but they're just the way that they carry themselves. Yeah. They're very like, there's like a dude that's got literally like 3 Tecates in his hand. and it's like, dude, like you're going to be able to go to the bar and get another Tecate during the show. It's totally going to be fine. But yeah, like people like who are like obviously talking about like they drove in from Cleveland or from like Indiana or something like that. Which wild. Awesome. Respect. Have you noticed that? Because you go to comedy shows.
Yeah, I definitely went to Kevin Hart like last month. And yeah, same thing where it's like all just like couples mainly coming in, and yeah, they're just like carrying a bunch of stuff all the time.
They're taking a lot of pictures, and yeah, Callie, I was just like, oh man, like a lot of tourists here, and she was like, how do you even know? Like, and I was just like, I would bet that more than 80% of the people here are not from Chicago, and of course, like the couple that's sitting behind us, this like big dude who's wearing like an Ohio State hat and like the button-down shirt and like the vest over it, and he's like immediately talking with like an accent. I don't know what it is. I don't know if that's how they talk in Ohio or whatever. And like, yeah, is talking about how like, oh yeah, Chicago, like this weekend has been like whatever. And I'm like,
we got to get out of here as soon as the show ends.
No, he really appreciated, the one of the openers told a joke about a cousin is with Asperger's and the guy behind me
lost it.
He loved that one for sure. But Aziz was pretty good.
I enjoy going to comedy shows a lot, and I think seeing what people laugh at is just as funny as like what they're doing. Like, because if you just have someone right next to you, just go nuts at the most random thing, that cracks me up just as much.
The same thing happened. Same guy, same opener. And like the opener is like, yeah, like I like stopped going to see my therapist, and the guy nobody's laughing, and the guy behind me just starts laughing, and he just goes therapist, and I'm like, but of course then that's funny. Yeah. Then you're like laughing at that.
You're like, God damn it, totally derailed.
So yeah, that was pretty good. I guess I'll give you that. But just as an aside, hot yoga with girlfriend who's like beautiful, most beautiful person in the world, not in like the not in fighting shape, I guess I would say.
Sure.
was something for sure. There was a lot of like, I'm like scrambling to do this move, and I look over and Callie's just standing there like looking at everybody, and I'm like, I didn't even know we could just stand.
Yeah, it turns out you pay for whatever experience you want.
Yeah, true. But yeah, man, pretty good weekend. Let's get to the markets. let's talk about it. U.S. dollar taking some notes from last week, some more selling. Really interesting to see the range of action, though, because Canadian dollar has actually been super weak the last several days, has not been taking part in any of the upside against this U.S. dollar. As you can see, USD CAD hanging right in there around 144, which of course isn't the heights that we saw when tariff talks started to emerge in early February. But this dollar is not coming off of 144. And if you take this out as a rounding error, this is really the high for this market. You jump over to the dollar-yen market, and I know that yen and in Canada, not a ton of crossover. One's a commodity currency. One is, a more entrenched traditional currency with flight to quality attributes. And this is a totally different dollar chart. As you can see, dollar yen now trading below 146 for the first time going back to October, early October, as this dollar gets punished. And Frank is supposed to go to Japan in 2 freaking weeks, which is great timing. I mean, whatever. What are you going to do? But yeah,
you book some stuff ahead.
But this dollar, the diversity of price action we're seeing across these major currencies is pretty wild. What's your favorite slice here today?
I think the yen has been the most interesting to watch, just because in terms of headlines, this one's just moved pretty consistently with U.S. rate expectations and that flight to quality. But I agree, this is a really exciting time to be looking at dollar pairs across the board, because regardless of if Canada and Japan have similarities or their currencies do, when the news cycle is kind of off the dollar, we do tend to see just a widespread dollar up, dollar down, to varying degrees based on what's going on, but really not the case here at all, as we have so many different narratives. We have the Canadian trade piece, we have the Europe surge. That one has been just relentless. Looks
Super
like
strong.
we've found some sort of level here, but throughout last week, weren't really sure where that was going to be. This on the heels of a ton of proposed European stimulus, which kind of we're watching. If you look in February, some of those dips and spikes were around some Ukraine, Russia ceasefire news talks discussion, but that was more of kind of the flight to quality, like panic. Risk
out
on,
of euros
risk off
into U.S. dollars.
Yep.
There was also the looming, what is the tariff going to be on the euro area? And yeah, you're talking about here when we got down to 102. And since then, aside from some of those, blips of is this Russian-Ukrainian war, is it coming off the table? Is it still on the table? You take those rounding errors off, and it's a pretty straight shot from 102 to 108 here.
Insane.
And yeah, though we're now trading 108.50, which is higher than where we were trading the start of last week, does seem to be slowing down a little bit. Coming off of last night's open, this is the slowest pace piece out of a lot of the stuff on our boards. I mean, Canada is the slowest, but euro and sterling not moving that much. The last thing that I'll throw in there before we get to our main segment is the non-Canada commodity currencies are seeing a little bit of a jump here, and by no means has New Zealand dollar or Australian dollar been the strongest currencies since the start of February, where we saw that U.S. dollar kind of peak against most major currencies. But seeing a little bit more upside here today. This has been one that's been weaker than those other major currencies against USD. Is there a little bit of a catch-up game here? Or if there's a reversion in euro and yen, is your New Zealand dollar, Australian dollar a little bit kind of uncorrelated to that price action? We'll see. But yeah, interesting to see that this Kiwi and Aussie are both up a good chunk here to start the week. We'll see if that continues.
Yeah, it is. This one's interesting because when you're trying to gauge U.S. dollar strength across the board, where's it positioned? This is now the interesting one to look at, where you still have kind of an established range. If we break through that to the upside, then it's kind of an alarm, like, oh, U.S. dollar weakness really across the board.
Yeah.
Whereas right now, just euro, completely different story.
Euro and yen are like in no man's land already, where it's like there's nothing to lean against.
Yep.
But yeah, if this Aussie and Kiwi piece, they're 50 to 100 points away from their highs of the last couple of months of year-to-date trading. And so will be interesting to see if they can get there. Whereas, yeah, that euro and yen piece, we'll see. Yen not slowing down, euro slowing down a little bit, but yeah, 108.50 is a hell of a price. But let's get into a little bit of talk around interest rates as I bring up the slides.
Yeah, and perfect segue from the platform to the slides as we're talking about the yen, which has moved a lot with this. What are we talking today?
U.S. interest rate update. I know we're a week or so out from the March Fed meeting, which will be super interesting. Still not anything likely to happen in terms of action at that meeting. But this, Glenn, is a huge one in terms of like, you might see a massive move in interest rate markets and Forex markets, and then, of course, all of the second and third tier markets, like your equities, your metals, and other commodities across the board, on what's going to happen in the next Fed meetings. We see this all the time where it's like, if you go back and look at the data historically, which we do all the time, and say, okay, well, these were the meetings where they actually cut or they actually hiked. You might look at the price action around them and say, like, I don't see a lot there. Or when they cut, the U.S. dollar on that day actually saw a little bit of a bid.
Right.
And why isn't it correlated? Because the Fed of the last, really, as you and I have been trading, the last 5 to 10 years, has been super choreographed going into their action. Right. But it's those meetings where, oh, nothing's expected to happen, but Powell comes out and says something like, we're definitely going to hike, 2 times this year, maybe more. Something like that happens, and then all the markets shift for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that we might get a little more excitement this time. We're getting a dot plot, aren't we?
Yeah, I think this is supposed to be the projections and everything.
And those, it's kind of darts on a board, what have you. But this one might have a little more expectation into it because, as we'll talk about, markets guessing a lot where things will be if the Fed comes out with this dot plot of future rate expectations and confirms or denies what everyone's kind of thinking. We could see some shakeup off that.
Yeah, and the market definitely thinking more cuts. But let's get to the historical action. The Fed has cut rates from 5.5% down to 4.5% in the last year as inflation has cooled. Now, inflation is still, and I believe we have some inflation data in the U.S. coming out this week ahead of this March FOMC. Inflation is not at 2% yet. That's where they want it. But it does seem like we're in the scenario of like, it's close enough. We're not talking about it so much.
Right.
The market seems more worried or at least looking at the potential for a U.S. economic slowdown, and that's stoking these cuts, as opposed to a few months ago, Glenn, it was, oh, well, inflation has moved from 6, 7, 8, 9%, whatever metric you're looking at, down to 2, 2.5, 3%, whatever metric you're looking at. And so these rates should normalize lower so that the real rate of interest is only, 100 bips above that inflation rate. Now it's like, oh, we need to cut because the U.S. economy is slowing down.
Right. And you make a good point that we've gotten inflation down to around 3%. It's stayed there. Maybe it's been a little stickier than people like, but then you turn to what we're looking at right now, where our interest rates still at 4.5% is sufficiently restrictive, as the Fed believes, and is still high historically, even though we're coming down from 5.5%. With these rates staying where it is, that gives the Fed leeway to say we can stop, we can keep going until we get some of those growth scares.
Not the same as, 5 to 10 years ago, where it's like interest rates are 0 to 1.5%, and the U.S. economy has had a bad couple of months. Where do we go from here? So yeah, coming down from 4.5%, or what was 5.5% last year, maybe a little bit easier. Here's what the market is looking at in 2025 for the last meeting of the year. Market now expecting less than a 2% chance of no cuts for the remainder of the year, and that was well above 2%. I think it was closer to 10%, maybe even higher at certain points this year, which you might say, well, Frank, that's still not a big chance, but it's relatively significant of no cuts this year, just a couple of months ago to start the year. Now looking at less than 2% chance of no cuts this year and a greater than 50% chance, Glenn, of 70 bips or lower than where we are. And it'll be really interesting to see now the distribution trading between 100 bips and lower, and there's some tail risk of maybe getting down to 3%, but there's still a good chunk of chance in the 1 or 2 cuts for this year.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point with the no cuts. Yeah, that percentage hasn't changed a ton, but where we are seeing the most movement is that 50% chance. It was looking like, if we're looking at the bars on the right, it was all the percentages were in those 1 to 2 cuts. Mm-hmm. Now the center of the distribution completely shifted.
Yeah, with a chance of getting down to, I mean, it's only 4%, 4.5%, but an outside chance of maybe 3% interest rates by the end of the year. And so looking at the dollar price action around this, no coincidence that we've seen dollar downside from the start of the year, where there was a 76% chance, very high likelihood of just 50 bips or less in cuts, and now there's less than a 50% chance of just that 50 bips or less in cuts, coinciding with this dollar falling multiple percentage points against the yen, against the euro, against the pound since the start of the year. Here's where I want to end, though, Glenn. When is the next cut expected? Not expected for March, although the chances are now 5 to 10% that they do come out and cut. I think the market is still not really looking at that with any likelihood. Where the likelihood does get greater than 50% of a cut is in June of this year.
Which is earlier than we've seen in recent months, and that gives a lot of validation to the narrative that multiple 3-4 cuts could come this year.
Yeah.
Because if the first one isn't until September, then you're kind of back against the wall, have to cut every meeting. You cut in June, maybe you even cut in May, and then you have, 4 or 5 meetings to do 1, 2, 3 cuts, or even wait and then a jumbo cut like we saw last year.
And what's been the kind of elephant in the room, the whole year-to-date trading has been the fact that major economies like the Euro area, like the UK, like New Zealand, Australia, a lot of different parts of the world, Canada as well, close to the U.S. geographically and by trade, have been cutting consistently. And we've been kind of saying, is the U.S. siloed off from this, or are they just the last to fall into this trend? And so it does become, okay, maybe they're not cutting till June, but then does it become, cut, 2, 3, 4 cuts in a row like it's been in these other central banks? Will be interesting to see, but there's your update going into the March Fed meeting. Thanks so much for sharing today with us, Glenn, and sharing your stories from the weekend. We'll be talking more tomorrow morning, but hang in for Tom, Tony, and Vanetta coming up next.
Thanks, guys.
You can get up to $4,000 when you open and fund a new account with tastytrade. That's 4,000 buckaroos, 4,000 bills, or clams, 4,000 in dough or cheddar, not the cheesy kind. 4 large, 4K, 4 grand, which is no small thing. Open and fund a new tastytrade account and get on the platform for trading.